What if the borders drawn on your map, the laws passed in your city, and like the very concept of your country are not actually political realities at all?
Right.
What if they're actually engineered religious idols designed specifically to bypass the laws of physics?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds completely like the premise of some dystopian sci-fi novel, right?
Totally.
But if you analyze the structural blueprints of modern society through a very specific analytical lens, well, that is exactly the conclusion you reach. It's a terrifyingly precise mechanism.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking you on an exhaustive, highly specific journey into the actual mechanics of global power.
Mhm.
Our mission today is an A to Z structural analysis of a very rigid, highly technical document. It is titled verbatim as lineofdefense.pdf.
Yeah, and if you are listening to this right now, expecting a standard overview of international relations or just a breezy political commentary, we really need to reset those expectations immediately.
We really do.
Because this document is essentially a systemic audit. It doesn't look at the world through the lens of messy human politics. It looks at it through structural theology and rigid cause and effect mechanisms.
And because of that, we have to make a very clear disclaimer before we go any further.
Absolutely.
This text contains intense, politically and theologically charged frameworks. It makes massive, uncompromising claims about world governments, religious institutions, and the global economy.
Right.
Our job today is absolutely not to take sides. We are not endorsing the material, and we are not condemning it either.
Exactly. We're just analysts here.
Right. We are simply acting as impartial guides to help you unpack this rigid, logical framework presented in the text, exactly as the author designed it. We're just looking at the machine and explaining how the gears turn.
And to understand those gears, well, we have to adhere to a very strict rule for this analysis.
Yeah, lay it out.
We are going to use simple, accessible English to explain the overarching concepts. We want this to make sense, whether you have a PhD in political science or, you're just intensely curious about how systems work.
Right, approachable.
But we absolutely must use the document's precise terminology for its core components. The author treats this text like a mathematical formula. If we alter the variables, the whole equation breaks.
Yeah, if a blueprint calls for a load-bearing titanium beam, you can't just call it some metal and expect the building to stand.
Exactly.
So let's lay out the mandatory, unalterable terms we will be using throughout this deep dive.
Okay, there are several core strings that the text relies on, and we will use them verbatim whenever referencing these specific concepts.
Yeah.
They are, and listen closely, Dini Fitrat Dini Islam, country, state, flag, god, idol. Tahut, Iblis, god of UN. Watan, Dini secularism, Sud, and Riba.
Okay, let's unpack this. We start at page 1, the foundational crisis. The very first sentence of the document drops this massive declaration. It establishes a baseline global crisis by claiming that an invisible, systemic enemy has successfully established 14 lines of defense.
Yeah, 14.
And the truly terrifying part. The text claims the global ummah, meaning the global Muslim community, is completely unaware that they are trapped behind these lines.
Right, because the document diagnoses a profound historical transition. It doesn't view history as just, a series of random events.
Right.
It states that a specific agenda, the kingdom of Dajjal, which in Islamic eschatology basically represents the ultimate system of deception and anti-truth, that kingdom cannot be established globally without a prerequisite structural change.
Okay, and what was that change?
That prerequisite was the absolute abolishment of the Khalafat.
Now, for anyone unfamiliar, the Khalifat wasn't just like a king sitting on a throne, right? How does the text actually view it?
The text views the Khalafat as a unified, borderless system of governance. It was the structural embodiment of divine law operating in the real world.
Wow, okay.
So abolishing it wasn't just a political defeat. It was the destruction of an entire operating system for human society. And the text points a very accusatory finger at how this was achieved.
Yeah, it doesn't blame outside invaders for the collapse, which is interesting. It points the finger inward.
Yes.
It explicitly asserts that religious scholars of the time played a major role on behalf of Dajjal in creating what we now know as divided nation-states. And the text refers to these nation-states verbatim as Watan.
That is a critical mechanism to understand.
Yeah.
The text argues that dividing the unified system into fragmented Watan was not natural progress or like administrative convenience. It was a deliberate sabotage that directly resulted in global disorder.
And it blames the scholars for this.
It places the architectural responsibility for this chaos squarely on the shoulders of Muslim political and religious leaders who, accepted the borders.
But how do you convince an entire civilization to just abandon a unified global system and enthusiastically adopt these fragmented nation-states?
That is the big question.
The text argues this was achieved through a massive psychological manipulation involving the definitions of two words, deen and religion.
Right.
Now, I always thought those words were basically synonyms. How does the document separate them?
This separation is literally the engine driving the entire document. The text explicitly defines Dini Islam as an entire code of life. It's comprehensive.
Meaning it covers everything.
Everything. From how you wash your hands to how you structure an international trade agreement. It is the physics of human existence.
And religion. How is that different in this context?
The text strips the word religion of any structural power whatsoever. It defines religion strictly as an aspect of individual life.
Okay.
It's reduced to a private affair consisting merely of myth, dogma, ritual, or a mode of worship. It's just what you do in your own head or, inside a designated building.
So if religion only handles the private individual life, there is a massive vacuum. Who handles the collective life?
Exactly. And the text defines collective life as the political, social, and economic systems.
Right.
Under the original unified system, Dini Fitrat, Dini Islam, divine law governed both the individual and the collective. But the document argues that this unity was intentionally hijacked.
It claims that Iblis, god of UN, Iblis being the theological figure of Satan, actually changed the psyche of the ummah.
Yes, exactly.
And the mechanism for this psychological change was the implementation of Duni secularism. So by introducing this new framework, the global Khalafat was transformed in the minds of the people into a mere religious sect. Let me see if I can map this out with an analogy just to make it crystal clear.
Please do.
Okay, so it sounds like taking a comprehensive computer operating system. Let's say you have an OS that runs everything seamlessly, your file management, your hardware cooling, network protocols, your security.
Right, the whole machine.
And then a virus or like a competing corporate entity convinces you to downgrade that entire OS into just a single decorative app on your phone.
Oh, that's good.
You can open the app, look at it, and feel good about it. But a completely different hidden operating system is actually running the hardware, tracking your data, and controlling the network.
That analogy hits the exact mechanical reality the document is describing. Duni Islam is the foundational operating system.
Right.
But Iblis, god of UN, introduced Dini secularism as the new hidden OS. The ummah accepted the downgrade, thinking they still had their faith because the app still opens. They don't realize the hardware has been entirely co-opted.
Wow. That brings us to page 2. If the OS has been swapped, there has to be physical and legal infrastructure enforcing this split in the real world.
Yes, there does.
You can't just change a mindset without building institutions to lock that mindset in place. So how exactly is Deen-e-secularism enforced?
The document maps this out meticulously by dividing society into two operational domains. Section A, which deals with religious sects, and Section B, which deals with political sects.
Walk us through Section A first. What happens to belief systems under secular infrastructure?
Under Dini secularism, Islam, along with Christianity, Hinduism, Shia, Sunni, and every other belief system is completely neutralized.
Neutralize how?
The text argues that the system reduces all of these to a myth. It confines them strictly to homes and places of worship. You are allowed to believe whatever you want as long as that has absolutely no binding authority on the streets.
And the document offers a really biting critique of what this does to communities, right?
Oh, it does. It points out a tragic irony. Because the ummah accepted this downgrade, they now spend all their energy fighting internal, localized battles.
Like arguing with each other.
Exactly. They label each other as kafir, meaning someone who conceals the truth or disbelieves over incredibly minor, private sectarian affairs. They will tear a community apart over how to position their hands during prayer, go completely oblivious to the fact that the entire structural reality around them has been captured by an alien system.
They are arguing over the wallpaper inside a house that is currently burning down.
That's exactly it.
Which brings us to Section B, political sects. If all the traditional religions are locked inside the house arguing about wallpaper, what is running the streets? What is the actual law?
This is where we hit the most confronting terminology in the entire analysis. The collective life, the streets, the economy, the courts are run by nation-states.
Okay.
And the text states categorically that these nation-states are founded on country-state flag god idols.
Country-state flag god idols. That is not a metaphor in this text, is it?
Not at all. It is a literal, mechanical definition. The text argues that these idols represent the absolute law of the land, and crucially, they operate by force.
Right.
You can opt out of a religious ritual. You cannot opt out of paying taxes or following the penal code enforced by the flag.
I am struggling a bit with how easily humanity accepted this, though. If you are a deeply religious person, how do you just hand over the ultimate authority of your society to a flag? What is the psychological trick there?
What's fascinating here is how the text identifies the exact psychological bypass used to achieve this compliance.
Okay, what is it?
It points to a specific, highly revered verse from the Quran, verse 2.25, which states, "Let there be no compulsion in religion."
Right, the principle that faith must be a free choice, otherwise it isn't real faith.
Exactly. The text argues that Dini secularism weaponized this principle by copying it.
Weaponized it.
Yeah, the secular system uses the concept of no compulsion to make private faith an entirely free choice. It hands you the illusion of ultimate freedom. You can be whatever sect you want in your living room.
Okay.
But concurrently, it strictly and violently enforces Dini secularism as the inescapable law of the land in public.
So it uses the divine principle of spiritual freedom to basically build a structural page.
Precisely.
You are free to think whatever you want, but you will physically obey the state. We actually have a visual representation of this provided in the source material, labeled Graphic 100C77 level1.png. Can you map the mechanics we just discussed onto that visual?
Yeah, the graphic is a flowchart that perfectly distills this hijacking. At the very top, the overarching canopy is Dini secularism. It serves as the master node. Got it. From there, it bifurcates into two distinct isolated paths. The left path drops down into individual life. This box is explicitly labeled with private affairs, myth, and dogma.
And that's where the religions go.
Exactly. Underneath that, you see all the religious sects, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, various denominations, all boxed in together.
Contained and neutralized.
Contained. Now, if you look at the right path, it descends into collective life. This box contains the political, economic, and social systems. And the chart explicitly links this entire collective domain to the rule of the flag idol.
Wow.
The visual makes it undeniably clear the overarching secular law controls the collective reality while permitting the illusion of freedom in the isolated individual box.
The document draws a really provocative historical parallel here to hammer home what this flag actually functions as. It compares the modern statutory laws governing that right-hand path to something very ancient.
It compares them directly to the ancient idols of Makkah long before Islam.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We didn't tend to think of ancient idol worship as just people bowing to stone statues out of superstition. But the text clarifies the mechanism. Those idols, like Hubal, were not just spiritual totems. They represented the actual land law, the constitution of the tribal chiefs.
Right.
When you made a sacrifice to the idol, you were submitting to the political and economic jurisdiction of the tribe.
So the text is saying nothing has fundamentally changed.
Nothing.
Modern statutory laws operate through the exact same mechanism. They are enforced in the name of the country-state flag god idol, precisely the same way ancient tribal laws were enforced in the name of a stone idol. The material changed from stone to fabric, but the structural function of the idol remains identical.
It is an unbroken lineage of systemic control.
Which naturally leads us to ask, who is running this system globally? Like, if the individual nation-states are the local idols, what is the master architecture?
That's the logical next step.
Right. This takes us to pages 3 and 4 and the role of the UN Security Council. The text does not hold back on its assessment of international law.
No, it views international law as the ultimate usurpation. The text asserts that the United Nations Security Council actively claims to be Al-Akbar.
Al-Akbar meaning the greatest, or the supreme, a title strictly reserved for the divine.
Yes, by claiming absolute veto power over global conflicts, borders, and international legality. The text argues the UN Security Council is actively and structurally rejecting Allah's supremacy. It is setting itself up as the final arbiter of reality.
But wait, how does human progress, science, and governance fit into this?
Well,
Because the secular world would argue they're just trying to manage a complex planet using reason and technology. The document uses the term acquired knowledge to describe this. What does that mean in this framework?
the text has a deeply functional view of humanity's purpose. It states that man is appointed as a khalifah on earth. In this context, a khalifah is a steward, a viceroy tasked with managing the planet.
Okay.
And the ultimate goal of this stewardship is to establish justice.
And it defines justice not just as a legal concept, but as the pinnacle of worship.
Right, exactly. Sitting in a mosque praying is a form of individual worship, but establishing systemic justice, fair courts, equitable economics, protecting the vulnerable, that is the highest structural worship. And to achieve this, man is given acquired knowledge.
Which is?
This includes science, technology, medicine, and statecraft.
So building a hospital, engineering a bridge, or designing a fair tax system using acquired knowledge is actually supposed to be an act of supreme worship.
Under Dini Fitrat Dini Islam, yes. But the document argues that this crucial tool, acquired knowledge, has been entirely hijacked by a hostile framework.
Hijacked by who?
It calls this the satanic ideology, or the Taghuti ideology.
Taghut generally means anything worshipped other than God, or a system that transgresses divine limits. How does the text explicitly define the satanic ideology verbatim? We really need the exact string here.
The text defines the satanic ideology verbatim as moral, spiritual, sexual freedom in the name of rational thinking. That is, there is no God, idol, or Allah except country, state, flag, God, idol.
Let me process that. It uses the guise of rational thinking and the promise of absolute personal freedom, moral, spiritual, sexual as the bait.
Yes.
But the hook is that to secure those freedoms, you must acknowledge that the only true functional authority in reality is the country, state, flag, God, idol.
Right. The state grants you freedom of the flesh, and in exchange, you grant the state absolute sovereignty over the law.
The document takes this a step further and equates this modern dynamic to a very specific ancient entity, Baal. Why Baal?
Because Baal, in ancient Near Eastern religions, was the god of fertility, weather, and authority. Baal demanded absolute allegiance and often terrible sacrifices in exchange for agricultural prosperity and security.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, the text views the modern nation-state's demand for unwavering patriotism, military sacrifice, and total economic compliance in exchange for civic security as the exact same structural transaction. The state flag is the modern Baal.
Wow. Okay, this brings us to what I believe is the most mechanically rigid, intense equation in the entire analysis. It is referred to as the mathematical law of legislation.
This is a heavy one.
It is. I want you to state this explicit mechanic exactly as it is written in the text, without softening it or interpreting it.
Okay. The document states the reason legislation, LGBT, is done in the name of country, state, flag, God, idol by our leaders, Taghut 4.60, is because the Quran cannot be amended.
Hold on. We need to pause and tear this down to the studs, because this is the core bypass mechanism of the modern world according to the text.
It's the linchpin.
It's essentially describing a legal money laundering operation. If a core foundational text like the Quran is an absolute constant and mathematically cannot be changed, you face a brick wall if you want to pass a law that directly violates it.
Right. You can't just cross out a verse with a red pen.
So what do? You have to invent an entirely new author with the supposed authority to write a new superseding text. Is that the mechanical logic here?
You have grasped the exact mechanism. You cannot amend the original divine document. It is physically and historically immutable.
Yeah.
Therefore, to enact something explicitly forbidden by that document, the text uses the examples of riba, which is interest, or new social legislations. You must create a surrogate authority, a fake god.
But a fake god needs physical anchoring in the real world to be legally binding.
Precisely. That physical representation is the country, state, flag, god, idol. But a flag is a piece of cloth. It cannot speak, it cannot write laws, it cannot debate in a chamber.
Right.
Therefore, the idol requires a human voice to articulate its will. That mouthpiece is the Taghut, the secular leaders, the parliamentarians, the congressmen. They speak in the name of the flag to pass the laws that amend the unmendable.
That is a staggering diagnostic claim. It is asserting that all modern secular legislation isn't just a byproduct of Enlightenment philosophy or democratic progress.
No, not at all.
It is a mandatory structural mechanism of idolatry required by the laws of logic to bypass an unchangeable divine text. Like, the false god isn't a byproduct of the system. The system mathematically requires the false god to function.
It is a functional necessity for rebellion.
Which leads us directly into sections 4 and 5 of our deep dive. If this is the core mechanism, how does the system protect it? How do you keep billions of people from noticing that they are participating in this massive structural bypass?
Well, the document answers this by mapping out the 14 lines of defense.
Right.
This is a sequential matrix, a step-by-step progression of how an entire civilization is captured, conditioned, and neutralized.
Let's break these down.
We can group these lines chronologically to understand how the fortress is built. The first sequence, covering lines 1 through 7, is entirely about erasure and replacement. It is the architectural phase of the takeover.
Let's walk through this sequence. It starts at the absolute macro level.
It begins with line 1, rejecting Allah's existence at the state level. This is the bedrock of the secular world. It doesn't mean every citizen is an atheist. Right. It means the state apparatus itself, its courts, its treasury, its military operates as a completely godless entity. It recognizes no higher divine jurisdiction.
But as we just discussed, nature abhors a vacuum. If you remove the ultimate authority, society will collapse into anarchy unless you immediately replace it. This is line 2.
Line 2 is replacing Allah with an artificial country god construct, which the text identifies as Watan. Once the true creator is structurally removed from state authority, a substitute must be installed to demand loyalty and organize the masses. The nation-state is born.
But a theoretical nation-state isn't enough. You have to make the population feel it in their bones. You have to make them willing to die for it.
That is the function of line 3, integrating the country-state flag god idol into the community psyche as an unyielding anchor.
The psychological phase.
Exactly. Through anthems, pledges, historical myths, and civic rituals, the population internalizes the idol. It becomes their primary identity, superseding their religious brotherhood.
Which prepares the ground for line 4. Once they love the idol, they need a way to feel like they're participating in its power.
Line 4 is replacing the lawgiver via democracy or the divine rights of people, utilizing Taghut as the mouthpiece for legislation.
Oh, okay.
The people, having internalized the flag idol, use democratic systems to elect leaders. These leaders act as the voice of the idol, generating new laws under the illusion that it is the will of the people.
But what do they do with the original divine laws? You can't just ignore a text that billions of people believe is sacred. You have to neutralize it legally. This is line 5, and it feels like the ultimate downgrade.
Line 5 is merging the Quran and Sunnah into secular constitutions, effectively erasing their independent divine authority.
Right.
This is a brilliant structural trap. By writing Islamic principles into a secular constitution saying Islam is the state religion or no law shall contradict the Quran, they subordinate the divine text to the secular document.
Wait, really? By including it, they subordinate it?
Yes. The divine law only has power because the secular constitution allows it to have power.
The Constitution becomes the master, and the divine text becomes the servant. It is a containment strategy. And once the divine text is contained, the lawmakers can do whatever they want.
Which brings us to line 6, parliamentarians acting as RAG.
Rab meaning Lord.
Yes, the word Rab means Lord, Sustainer, or Absolute Master. Parliamentarians take on this divine attribute by unilaterally changing, adding, or removing laws.
Okay.
The text specifically highlights that they use this power to sanction practices expressly forbidden by the divine text, such as sood and riba.
They legalize what is forbidden and forbid what is legalized. They become the ultimate arbiters of right and wrong.
Exact.
And to lock this entire 6-step architectural replacement in place to ensure no one within the system can dismantle it from the inside, you have line 7.
Line 7 is the perversion of the oath. Anyone who enters the apparatus of power, a judge, a soldier, a prime minister, must swear an oath. But they do not swear absolute obedience to the ever-living creator. They are forced to swear absolute allegiance to the Constitution and the non-living country-state flag god idol. The text vividly describes this idol as idle wind.
So the first 7 lines are the blueprint of the matrix. You swap out the creator for a state, the divine law for a constitution, the prophet for a parliamentarian, and you bind it all with a perverted oath.
The structure is built.
But a structure needs to be defended against those who realize they are trapped inside it. This takes us to the second half of the matrix, lines 8 through 14.
If the first half was architectural replacement, the second half is operational enforcement and containment. It is about how the system sustains itself and crushes dissent.
And it starts with the economic engine, line 8.
Line 8 is implementing an interest-based economy, specifically termed riba. The text doesn't view interest as just a predatory banking practice.
No,
it states that implementing riba engages the entire civilization in an active, structural war with Allah.
I need to push back here, or at least ask for clarification. Why is an economic model categorized as an act of war?
Because in Dini Fitrat, wealth must circulate organically, like blood in a body, to sustain the whole society. Riba is a mathematical mechanism that inherently sucks wealth from the bottom and concentrates it at the top without producing real value.
Right, it creates inequality.
It defies the natural physics of equity. By forcing the entire global population to participate in this system just to survive, the secular architecture effectively forces everyone into continuous systemic disobedience.
It makes compliance mandatory for survival. But inevitably, people will realize this is unjust. People will want to fight back against this secular architecture. How does the system handle armed or ideological resistance?
It manages it by creating false enemies and false paradigms. Line 9 is deploying engineered proxy groups.
Like who?
The text specifically cites ISIS as a prime example. The mechanism here is twofold. First, these groups violently eliminate actual sincere deviants who threaten the system. Second, and more insidiously, they trap sincere but ignorant resistance fighters within false engineered matrices of extreme brutality.
It creates a horrifying caricature of Islamic governance. So when the average person looks at the resistance, they are terrified and run back to the safety of Dini secularism.
Exactly.
It is a perfectly engineered pressure valve. But what about the more mainstream resistance? The people who aren't extremists but sincerely want Islamic law in their countries.
The system co-opts them too. This is line 10, the critique of modern madrasa jihad. The system conditions these resistance groups to fight strictly for watan.
Wait, they are fighting for the nation-state. I thought they wanted a caliphate.
That is the brilliance of the trap. They fight for a localized, Shariah country. They want to capture the parliament and their specific nation-state to pass Islamic laws.
Oh, I see.
But by doing so, they accept the borders drawn by the secular system. They are tricked into fighting for the country-state flag god idol, while genuinely believing they are fighting for Islam. They fail to understand that the divine command is supposed to be globally supreme, not restricted by a line drawn on a map by a colonial power.
They accept the premise of the cage. They just want to be the ones holding the key. That is a devastating critique. And while all this is happening, what is the rest of the ummah doing?
They are completely distracted by line 11, fostering fierce internal sectarian divisions over private matters.
So back to the religious sects arguing.
Yes. The system encourages endless debates over minute theological details, who is a true believer, historical grievances from centuries ago. While the community is entirely consumed by this internal friction, Deen-e secularism safely and quietly commands the entire state infrastructure, the military, and the central banks.
Look over here at this theological argument while we control the levers of reality over there. Now, lines 12 and 13 seem deeply connected to this distraction, but they touch on something that looks very Islamic to an outsider, the enforcement of religious laws.
Yes, lines 12 and 13 deal with the superficial enforcement of Shariah penal laws. In some of these localized watan, the state will implement harsh physical punishments, flogging, amputations to legitimize itself in the eyes of the religious populace.
But the text argues this is a profound violation of the actual system.
It is a grotesque parody. The text explains that these isolated punishments are enforced completely divorced from foundational socioeconomic equity. Deen Islam is built on Deen-e-Haq, a system of absolute truth and social justice where, as the text explicitly quotes, even a dog should not die of thirst.
So you have a secular system wearing an Islamic mask. It eagerly enforces the punitive edge of the law to look legitimate, but entirely ignores the absolute fundamental prerequisite of providing economic justice, food, shelter, and care to the population.
Precisely.
It punishes the starving thief, but protects the predatory banking system of riba.
It is the ultimate hypocrisy, and it serves to further alienate people from the true divine system. And this entire tragic sequence culminates in the final defense. Line 14, the critical failure of technocrats and legal experts to develop statecraft compliant with Quranic principles.
So it all comes back to acquired knowledge.
It does. Because the religious scholars retreated into the private sphere of myth and dogma, and the technocrats were entirely educated by Deen-e secularism, there is no one left who knows how to operate the original system.
That's incredibly bleak.
The result is a total monopoly over hard power technology, law, military strategy held by the secular system without any true mastery over Deen-e Fitrat, Deen-e Islam. The fortress is complete because the prisoners forgot how to build their own tools.
We've just walked through a 14-layer fortress. It feels suffocating. It feels mathematically impenetrable. But the document does not stop at diagnosis.
No, it doesn't.
It claims to have the key to collapse the entire structure. This brings us to Section 6, the mandatory verification clause and the zero democracy proof. This maps to the final visual provided, Graphic 1000-07888044.png.
This is the climax of the document's logical framework. Having outlined the 14 lines of defense, it provides a rigorous, undeniable proof designed to intellectually dismantle them.
Before we get to the proof, walk us through the exact operational sequence one more time, because the text demands we understand this chain of cause and effect.
Okay, the rigid operational sequence is this. Constants replaced leads to needing a false god.
Right.
The false god leads to needing a physical idol, which is the flag, and that idol requires a mouthpiece, which is the takhut.
And the text's assertion is that without this precise sequence, alternative legislation like riba mathematically cannot exist.
Correct. The sequence is the only way to bypass the physics of the divine text. The proof then breaks this reality down into two domains to dismantle it: horizons, which is the external physical world, and selves, which is the internal psychological world.
Let's look at the horizons first. What is the external proof?
The external proof is observable reality. The text points out that every single nation-state must physically erect the country-state flag god idol as a baseline anchor.
Everywhere you go.
Yes, they must mandate anthems, pledges, and military salutes to this cloth. Why? Because without erecting this physical anchor in the external world, the state has no psychological mechanism to bypass Din-e-Fitrat and Islam. The sheer ubiquity of the idol is proof of its necessary function.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Now we move to the internal world, the selves. And if you're listening to this and wondering how a global system of democracy could possibly be categorized as an illusion, pay very close attention to this. This is the delegation paradox.
This is the zero democracy proof, and it is a masterpiece of unyielding logic.
Walk us through it.
The text argues that an individual citizen, as a created being, possesses exactly zero inherent right to make laws against nature or amend divine law.
I want to make sure I grasp the absolute nature of this. Because I, as a human, did not design the physics of the universe, did not create human biology, and did not write the original divine code, I have no administrative privileges.
Right.
My authority to alter the master operating system is mathematically zero.
That's the exact premise. You have zero authority. And
Yep.
here's the paradox, because zero multiplied by any number of people, even millions or billions of people voting in a global election, is still mathematically zero.
Wow. Okay.
So a collection of individuals cannot delegate a right to a parliament that they do not possess themselves.
If I have $0 in my bank account, I cannot write you a check for $100.
Exactly.
And if 1 million people, all with $0 in their accounts, pool their resources together, they still cannot write a check to the government for a single dollar.
Therefore, the text argues that democracy, in the context of legislating against divine law, is a complete logical fiction. It is a psychological illusion forced upon the masses, tricking them into believing that if enough zeros get together, they can somehow generate a one.
Right.
They are tricked into investing absolute sovereignty into an inanimate state idol, believing they are the ones giving it power.
It is a collective hallucination of authority. So how does the proof conclude? How do you collapse a hallucination that is enforced by armies and banks?
The conclusion of the proof demands mechanical action. To collapse the system, you must bifurcate the Constitution.
Bifurcate.
Yes, you must structurally separate the immutable, unchangeable principles of the Quran and Sunnah from the fluid, day-to-day administration of statecraft.
Meaning you acknowledge the divine text as the absolute, unchangeable ceiling of reality, and human statecraft is just the adaptable plumbing operating beneath that ceiling.
Exactly. And by mathematically executing this bifurcation, you permanently subtract the country-state flag god idol from the equation. It no longer has a function.
And when you subtract the idol,
The text claims the entire secular sequence collapses instantly. It's a domino effect. Without the idol, the takhut has no artificial authority to speak.
wow.
And without the takhut, you mathematically cannot pass laws like riba. The text asserts that this systemic collapse mechanically proves the supreme authority of Allah. It proves that the Quran is absolute HAQ, or undeniable truth, and demonstrates Allah's existence not as a mystical feeling, but as an undeniable, demonstrable fact.
It treats theology as the ultimate physics. If you remove the load-bearing pillar of the false god, the entire artificial matrix shatters against the bedrock of reality.
Yes.
This is an incredibly intense place to land, but as we move into Section 7, the final warnings, the document looks out at the current world and issues a severe, historically grounded alarm.
The text is not optimistic about the current trajectory. It compares the modern systemic ignorance of the ummah to the conditions in the Islamic world right before the Mongols destroyed Baghdad in 1258.
That was one of the most catastrophic civilizational collapses in history. The intellectual and political heart of the ummah was entirely oblivious to the structural reality of the threat about to crush them until the rivers ran black with ink and red with blood.
The document is warning that the modern ummah is in the exact same state of systemic blindness. They are arguing over sectarian minutiae, while a global, engineered architecture has already captured their reality.
It's a chilling comparison.
And to emphasize this, the text points to a profound theological comparison, referencing a specific hadith.
What is the comparison?
It references a hadith from the collection of Tirmidhi, which warns that the ummah will eventually follow the path of Bani Israel, the historical children of Israel, so closely that it will be like one shoe perfectly resembling the other shoe.
The archetype of a community that was given the divine law but gradually altered it, bypassed it with technicalities, and ultimately suffered severe systemic consequences.
Yes. The text argues that by accepting the country-state flag god idol and participating in dini secularism, the ummah has entered a state of profound mental slavery.
Right.
They are walking the exact path of Bani Israel, and the text warns this is setting the stage for a catastrophic 21st century civilizational holocaust.
It is a terrifying, stark warning. But a diagnostic audit usually offers a path to remediation. What is the ultimate mandate of this document?
The absolute mandate is collective tawbah. Now, tawbah is usually translated as repentance.
Like asking for forgiveness.
Right. But in this structural context, it is not just sitting on a prayer mat asking for forgiveness. It is a systemic, operational rollback.
Actionable rollback.
Exactly. It requires the intellectual and physical dismantling of the state idol. It demands waking up from the psychological illusion of the 14 lines, and finally establishing true functional mastery over acquired knowledge to govern the earth according to its actual physics.
I want to take a moment to contextualize all of this for anyone listening. We have just navigated an incredibly dense, uncompromising structural analysis of global civilization.
Yeah.
Why does this intricate mapping matter to your daily life?
It matters deeply.
Because whether you agree with the theological premises of this document or not, it challenges you to deeply investigate the invisible architecture governing your existence. It forces you to look at the economic systems you are bound to, the statutory laws you obey, and the national symbols you are conditioned to revere, and ask, are these natural realities? Or are they engineered mechanisms designed to restrict my understanding of what is actually possible?
It demands that you stop accepting the chaos of the world as natural and start recognizing the highly calculated machinery producing that chaos.
To recap this monumental journey, we trace the deliberate historical transition from a unified system to the fragmented watan. We explored how dini secularism downgraded the master operating system into a private myth, replacing the ultimate law with the country-state flag god idol. We walked through the brutal logic of the 14 lines of defense, from psychological anchoring to economic warfare via riba, and we dismantled the illusion using the delegation paradox, realizing that a billion zeros cannot vote a one into existence.
The logical framework presented in lineofdefense.pdf leaves absolutely no room for ambiguity or comfortable compromise.
It certainly doesn't. And as we conclude this analysis, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought that builds directly on the mechanics we've discussed today.
Yeah.
If the structural separation of eternal principles from adaptable day-to-day statecraft is the only mathematical way to collapse the idol, as the text claims, what does that mean for the future of global geography? If nature and the divine code naturally move toward absolute unity and frictionless efficiency, as Dean Aftertrat suggests, are the borders currently drawn on our maps defying the very laws of physics and human nature? How long can an artificial line hold back the natural physics of reality?
That is the ultimate question of systemic stress. Eventually, the artificial structure must give way to the natural foundation.
Thank you for joining us on this intense deep dive into the source material. We hope it gave you a radically new lens through which to view the structures, laws, and systems that surround you. Keep questioning the architecture, keep analyzing the mechanics, and we will see you next time.